In a field where knowledge of magic is essential to survive, most people expect its most legendary figure to also be a powerful wizard. After all, inquisitors are primarily mage hunters, so it stands to reason that being proficient at magic is a requirement for the job. This couldn't be further from the truth, though. It betrays a fundamental ignorance about the nature of magic and a dangerous hubris that plagues the long-lived races. Despite humans being incapable of casting spells, their unyielding desire for understanding is without equal in all of New Gaia, to the point where their application of basic natural law is indistinguishable from any other form of magic. That's why the greatest inquisitor in the history of our order wasn't a dragon, a dwarf, or even an elf like me. The title of greatest actually belongs to a human. More specifically, a man by the name of HFY. The commonly accepted narrative is that his lack of spellcasting is what ultimately limited him. Others claim he skirted a weird, blurry line between crazy zealot of truth and blatant heretic, since his keen ability to question things would often put him at odds with his superiors and even influence others into doubting divine law. As the rhfy last surviving member of his team, however, I would like to clear up the misconceptions surrounding him once and for all. Grandmaster Inquisitor HFY wasn't overlooked because of his human heritage or problems with authority. In fact, his skills were highly respected and even feared by the few people who could boss him around. Furthermore, the rank of Grandmaster is considered a rare honor that is barely ever granted. There have only been 17 in the past 250 years, and Arthux is the sole human on that list. Among his achievements, he was famous for beating dwarves at drinking contests, single-handedly slaying an elder dragon, and being one of the few mortals in the history of New Gaia that spoke to gods on a regular basis. After glancing at his record, you'd think there's a conspiracy against him, since he could have easily been the leader of our order on merit alone. But no, the reason Arthux was shunned is far more petty, yet understandable. Everyone simply hated crediting him for his work, mostly because he was a judgmental, disrespectful, alcoholic jerk. Every inquisitor at the monastery found him insufferable. He loved dissecting people's beliefs with a precision that cut deeper than any weapon and didn't know when to hold back. Worst of all, he never stopped calling me No. I'm getting ahead of myself. I realize this doesn't paint a flattering picture, but it serves a greater point. One of the biggest lessons I learned from Arthux is that, when seeking truth, failure is far more important than success. All intelligent life forms have an unconscious bias towards wanting to be correct. Because of this, we often aim to reassure ourselves of our existing beliefs, rather than question what we already know. This bias is more often than not the biggest roadblock to good decision-making. Everyone has it, and those who deny it are the most blinded by it. That's why, as Arthux put it, one must try to falsify a hypothesis, not prove it. It's the only way to eventually be correct. I believe this so strongly that, no matter how badly I expose his flaws, you'll still understand why I consider Arthux the greatest member of our order. When I was first asked to write this training manual, the Archcardinal requested it cover the basic principles of deduction I learned throughout my centuries-long career. Unfortunately, as soon as I started this undertaking, I realized I couldn't divorce these teachings from the man who drilled them into my head. It'd be easy to boast about everything I've accomplished after achieving the rank of Grandmaster, but if you understood what I said about failure, you also understand why there would be no value in that. The embarrassing journey I had to reach my level of proficiency is far more useful in that regard, and it all began when I met Arthux. My initial impression of him was obviously negative. It was my first day at the Sonata Monastery, so it took a while to find his chamber. The entrance was hidden away in an unkempt part of the west courtyard. A place so remote it was obvious the clergy wanted him as far away from the public as possible. Overgrown vines hung from the head of the doorway, almost like a curtain that veiled the mouth of a monster's lair. To say his chamber was a mess would be a massive understatement. Navigating that maze of stacked books was always precarious due to how pitch black it was. It reeked of alcohol and mildew, with unfinished plates of food scattered all over. "Hello?" I pulled aside a window, draped to illuminate the room. "Is anyone here?" "Fuck off, Blenadeur," said a deep, powerful voice. I looked around but couldn't see anyone nearby. Arthix then slowly rose out of a pile of books. It took me a moment to realize he had been sleeping on the floor. He was obviously nursing a hangover, sheltering his eyes from the sunlight. "I already said I'm not training another." He paused, finally seeing me. "Oh, great. She sent you anyway." I gave him a sheepish nod. Arthix immediately threw a book at me. "Then close the damn curtain. It's too early." "But it's noon," I said, rubbing my forehead. Getting hit by the book left me a little dizzy. Arthix ignored me, reaching for his flask. I couldn't believe he was an inquisitor. The way he acted went against every preconceived notion I had of our order. His shaggy appearance didn't do him any favors either. He always had messy hair and a scruffy stubble because he was too lazy to stay well-groomed. He also never wore the white and gold robes of our order, preferring to sport a sleeveless black shirt and brown combat trousers. Around his waist he carried 3 items: an enchanted wooden sword, a small leather-bound book, and a metal flask full of a dangerous cocktail he created out of hard liquor and pain-killing health potions. What surprised me the most was how old he looked. He had brown chestnut hair, graying at the sides, and sunburnt, wrinkly skin which, along with his missing right arm and bum leg, made him seem far more ancient than he actually was. Something about his weary, piercing gaze left the impression of a long and arduous life. His mere presence made me feel like a child, despite the fact that I was already over twice his age. "Hi," I said. "My name is—" "Shut up," I paused. "Names are too much work," continued Arthix, taking a long swig out of his flask. "Just bring me my case files on time and do what I say. If you can do that without fucking up, we'll get along great." "That's it?" "Yup. You can leave now." I tried my best to hide my irritation. After working so hard to pass the Inquisitor trials, the last thing I wanted was to be treated like a glorified errand girl. Arthix raised an eyebrow. "Problem?" Of course I had a problem. Any reasonable person would hate having a book thrown at their forehead only to be casually dismissed. And I'm pretty sure Arthix was well aware of that. I wasn't about to argue with my superior, though, especially on my first day. At the young age of 92, I didn't have enough experience yet to stand up for myself. The only thing I could mumble was, well, let me be clear with you." Arthix narrowed his eyes with sudden intensity. "I hate it when people avoid the truth. It always leads to pointless bullshit. If you have something to say it." I tried to stay quiet, but Arthix didn't lessen his glare, forcing me to blurt out, "I'm a person. I have a name. Treating me like this is demeaning. Isn't it obvious, you jackass?" I quickly looked away, red in the face. Never in my life had I defied authority like that. Arthix, however, simply chuckled and said, "Good. You're not a total wimp. And no, it's not demeaning, it's efficient. Most rookies die on their first mission." He grew wistful in his expression, softening his face. "It's easier to sleep when I don't know your names." I tensed up, taken aback. "Is this a joke?" "Nobody warned you?" "Not quite that way." Arthix grew pensive. "Interesting. I've always known Inquisitors do dangerous work, but that's not what I meant." Arthix tried to drink out of his flask and frowned, realizing it was now empty. "I do special jobs, which is code for all of the hardest cases other Inquisitors can't solve. I just don't have time to babysit while I work." I puffed up my chest. "I am more than capable of protecting myself." Arthix rolled his eyes. "That's what they all say. This is still inane. You have to call me something. Don't worry, Hairbangs. I'm sure I'll figure something out." And so, for the rest of our relationship, he would rarely call me anything other than Hairbangs. It was a fashionable hairstyle at the time, and I was proud of mine, but I'd never felt more self-conscious about them in all my life. Still, I wanted to prove myself back then, so I sadly operated under the delusion that he would eventually call me something else. Our first real case didn't come until a few months afterwards, when we heard a human child had just murdered their elvish schoolteacher with a magic spell. The description of the events still haunts me to this day. Apparently, the teacher was struck by an enchantment that made her laugh until running out of breath, screaming for help between chuckles. "What do you think?" asked Arthux. I blinked a few times, puzzled. He had never consulted me on anything. I genuinely didn't even know where to begin. The incident happened in front of 14 other children, who all gave similar testimonies, so it wasn't just some rumor being reported to us. And yet, it was impossible. Humans lost the ability to cast spells because of a divine decree. If a mortal found a way to reverse this, then it would put into question our divine dogma, the idea that the gods are the ultimate authority of our world. This put the inquisitorial order in an awkward position since, if we found the kid guilty, we would also be implicitly admitting the divine dogma was wrong. No other inquisitor wanted that responsibility. Only a fool would pursue it. "Well," said Arthux, annoyed by my silence, "I really doubt a human would just suddenly cast a magic spell." "Agreed. But how did it happen? Was it a coincidence? Or an accident?" "You're asking the wrong question," said Arthux. "A why will lead to a how, rarely the other way around." I pondered his words for a moment. Arthux had a point. Why would anyone do this? The victim wasn't notable. Just a low-born elf teaching basic math and grammar to children. If the human boy didn't do it, then there had to be a more sinister motive behind it. "Maybe someone's trying to undermine the gods?" "Plausible," said Arthux, "but unlikely. Not enough exposure. Any person radical enough to do that would choose a big city, not a small town. It doesn't have to be a huge statement. This could just be a particularly rebellious individual." Arthux shook his head. "You're bending over backwards to fit this hypothesis. Think. What's the most simple conclusion we can draw from the information? If the kid didn't really do it, and it wasn't an accident or coincidence, I guess, someone else wanted that teacher dead? Which means," I widened my eyes, "somebody's framing that kid and getting away with it." "Exactly." Arthux sprang up from his couch. I'd never seen him so energetic. "Get ready, hairbangs. We're dealing with someone ruthless enough to sacrifice a child, and clever enough to hide it well. I'll begin the travel arrangements then." "That won't be necessary." I squinted. "But don't we need horses?" "It's all right. I'm owed a few favors I can cash in." Arthux rifled through his leather-bound book until stopping on a page and began chanting in a strange eldritch language I didn't recognize. I would soon learn he was speaking the divine language of the gods. Lacking this context, though, it sounded like he was casting a really long spell without any mana behind it. I wondered if he had just gone insane until a gust of wind filled the room, coalescing into the shape of an eagle made of translucent blue energy. "This is Tudoward," said Arthux, "god of fast travel." I gaped my jaw. The casual way Arthux had just summoned a minor god left me at a loss for words. "I didn't even know that was possible. He'll be warping us to the region," continued Arthux. "Unfortunately, he can only take us to famous spots or places we've already visited. Ever been to North Farthest? The town in the case file?" Arthux nodded. "Not really. And you don't know anything about it?" "A little bit." "Go on. Tell the god what you know." The blue eagle hovered in place with no reaction. Its eyes shimmered intensely white, making its expression impossible to read. I paused for a moment, then said, I know it's farmland at the edge of the ruined forest, north of the farthest river. A famously old halfling settlement that grew into a town after welcoming a human diaspora. That's it? Pretty much. Oh well, I guess we'll walk the rest of the way. I didn't quite know what he meant by that, but the eagle screeched in its divine language, having a back and forth with Arthux that lasted a minute. The spirit then disappeared in a flash of light, leaving behind a swirling portal of blue energy on the floor. Arthux jumped into the portal without another word, and I quickly followed, fearing it might close too soon. By the time I opened my eyes,
we had landed safely on a dirt road near a riverbank. A big bridge made of wood, metal, and stone pillars stretched across a deep current of water rushing beneath. "Is that the farthest river?"
I asked, astonished. "Yup," said Arthux. "We're probably still a night away from the town." I couldn't believe it. We had just covered a month of travel in a second. "How in the cataclysm did you do that?" Arthux shrugged, walking ahead. "I technically didn't do it. You know what I mean." I shouted, trailing behind him. "Like I said, I'm owed a few favors. And you can just speak with gods? The divine language of the gods can be understood by anyone. It's not that hard if you practice. When you do enough inquisitorial work, you're bound to help out a spirit or two that are grateful and go from there." I still couldn't fully believe him. The thought of a god speaking on equal terms with a mortal was blowing my mind. "Why have I never heard of this?" "Good question," said Arthux. "The answer is most people hold too much reverence for the divine, so they don't even try. You should be nice and say hi to any spirits you encounter." "Nice?" I chortled. "That's rich coming from you." Arthux narrowed his eyes. "What do you say, girl?" Nothing. Despite the idyllic countryside that surrounded us, my first time traveling with Arthux was a strangely anxious experience. Birds sang a delightful tune in broad daylight as a warm wind rushed around us, and yet, for some reason, I always felt like I was walking around eggshells with Arthux. The thing that stood out to me the most was the amount of chronic pain he tried to hide. After spending the afternoon walking together, I could tell his many injuries had added up over time. His missing arm seemed to give him the most trouble. Only a gnarled stump remained, almost like the muscle was twisted off with a horrible yank. Every time his pain flared up, he reached for his missing arm like it was still there and started chugging the alcoholic health potion in his flask, which seemed to give him some temporary relief. Unfortunately, his tolerance only allowed him to stay reasonably sober until the middle of the night. Then he became a sloppy mess, forcing me to start a fire and camp until morning. We weren't too far from our destination by the time we woke up. North farthest surprised me with its beauty. It was a vast field of grassy hills with round doors and oval-shaped windows dotting them like eyes and noses. These little mountains had been hollowed out to create some of the coziest abodes in all of New Gaia. Generations of halflings had lived in these holes for over 1,000 years. Nestled between the hills were tall buildings made of wood and stone, where humans usually dwelled. These structures, although several centuries old, were still relatively new in comparison to the halfling holes surrounding them. A cobblestone pathway lined the main street with lamplights placed intermittently throughout, all seemingly of human design. As soon as we stepped into the town square, we were immediately greeted by an entourage of small folk. They were led by Mayor Wisehill, an old halfling lady that had been running north farthest for the past 60 years. Apparently, our presence had been the subject of much discussion this morning as we passed the farms surrounding the town. Their community was so tight-knit that most halflings in North Farthest knew we were on our way by the time we arrived. Mayor Wisehill insisted on having second breakfast with me, assuming that I was in charge, but Arthux quickly cut her off, saying, "You know why we're here, ma'am. Just skip the pleasantries and tell us what you know." "Excuse me?" The mayor squinted. "And you are?" "Grandmaster Inquisitor Arthux Wilfery. I'm in charge of the investigation." "A human inquisitor?" said Mayor Wisehill, shocked. "Nobody expects it, I know. If we could focus on the investigation, though, please," shouted a human man, towering over the halfling crowd. He made his way through with desperation in his eyes. "You've got to help Darren. This has to be a misunderstanding." "That's always your excuse," said Mayor Wisehill. Don't believe him, Inquisitor. His son has always been a troublemaker, playing pranks and making up stories. It was only a matter of time before he went too far. Yeah, cried out another halfling lady. Darren's a menace. He's pulled down. My pants! And mine, said a halfling man. This ain't a laughing matter. The rest of the entourage nodded along in agreement. It seemed the boy had been a thorn in their rear for quite some time. The father looked devastated by their unanimous judgment. Arthix leaned towards me, whispering, Who's Darren again? The boy in the case file, I grunted back, annoyed. His habit of forgetting names never ceased to irritate me. Ah, right. Arthix addressed everyone else. Just take us to the boy. We'll figure out what to do from there. Right, said Mayor Wisehill. About that, Arthix arched an eyebrow. What did you do? We were shamefully taken to a basement in the mayor's office, where Darren, a 12-year-old human boy, was locked in a cage made for raccoons. Due to its non-existent crime rate, North Farthest didn't really have a jailhouse to lock up anyone. This meant they needed to improvise when restraining the kid. They even went as far as both blindfolding and gagging him. You were pretty thorough, said Arthix flatly. Yes, said Mayor Wisehill. Many townsfolk were terrified that he could kill people with a word or stare. I made sure to keep him clean and fed, though. Let him out, said Arthix, and take all that crap off him. Every halfling in the room tensed up. Are you sure that's safe? Said an old halfling man. I can personally assure you this child didn't cast a spell, said Arthix. The gods would have torn this place asunder if that were the case. If you say so, said the mayor, gesturing at two assistants to let the boy out. As soon as he was freed, Darren ran to his father, who embraced him with a hug. Arthix remained unmoved by their reunion. He only waited a brief moment before saying, All right, that's enough. Right now, we need to prove you didn't kill your teacher. Darren widened his eyes. She's dead? I face-palmed. Apparently, nobody had told Darren the extent of what he did. The boy started openly weeping once the realization sank in. It was just a joke, he said between his loud sniffling. The bear said she would love it. Bear? Arthix squinted. What bear? Darren kept crying. Asking him anything else was pointless at the moment. He seemed inconsolable. Just another of his lies, said Mayor Wisehill. He claims a talking bear taught him an elvish joke, like in an old fairy tale. That wasn't in the report, I said. Why wasn't it mentioned? Because he's obviously lying, replied Mayor Wisehill. She sounded sweet, as if addressing a child, but with obvious condescension behind it. I'm not putting an excuse that silly in an official document. Let me see if I understand, said Arthix, matching her patronizing tone. You think the divine dogma being a lie is more likely than a talking bear? What? Mayor? Wisehill widened her eyes. No, the gods are beyond reproach. Then think before you speak. Mayor Wisehill lowered her head in submission. What should we do? I said. Darren isn't in any condition to speak right now. That's fine, said Arthix. You can scribe people's location, right? I nodded. Darren can go. Home for now. Arthix glared at the father. If you try to leave town, we will hunt you down and kill you. Understood? Yes, sir, said Darren's father. In the meantime, continued Arthix, there's something important we need to pick up. He glanced at the mayor with a smile. Where can I find this town's finest pipeweed farmer? Mayor Wisehill shook her head. I know it's popular in other halfling communities, but my father outlawed it here a century ago. What? Shouted Arthix. Good riddance, I say, added the mayor. Smoking that plant only makes people dull and lazy. Arthix seemed personally attacked by her comment. What kind of backwards halfling town doesn't have? I dragged him out of the room before he humiliated our sacred order any further. We spent the next few hours interrogating everyone involved in the incident. The families of the school. Children seemed to really like Ilvana, their teacher. Unfortunately, nobody seemed to know her on a personal level. Since she was relatively new in town, the only people familiar with her were those who had a child in school, relationships which were strictly professional. Throughout it all, however, I got the impression that they wanted to say more, but something was holding them back. By the time we finished speaking to everyone, I thought we had hit a dead end, but Arthux kept walking purposefully towards the outskirts of the town, in the direction of the ruined forest. I didn't understand his intentions until he said aloud, 18 families. We visited 18 families and not one of them had a smoking pipe in their home. I gave him a weary look. Is that all you've been thinking about? You don't understand, said Arthux. Halflings didn't cultivate pipe. Weed for shits and giggles. He paused. Okay, there may have been some giggles, but they weren't the main goal. Then what was? Rune bear repellent. I tilted my head at him. Really? Yup. Magical creatures like rune bears hate the smell of halfling weed. It's what originally allowed these people to build their villages in relative safety, and why they valued that plant so much. The fact that this town stopped growing it is concerning. Huh, I said, seeing his logic. It also explains the bear Darren saw. Yes, on the surface it seems to fit, but it only raises more questions. Like, why hasn't this town been plagued by bear attacks? Maybe they're good at handling them? No, it has to be something else. Why? Look at them. These people are wimps. They haven't fought anything in their lives. Fair, I said. There weren't any obvious weapons in the houses we visited. Their sensitive attitudes and lack of a jailhouse suggested this town rarely, if ever, saw violence. Something must be keeping the bears away then. Exactly. That's why I'm sure someone is still growing weed. So that's why we're heading to the forest? Arthux nodded. It's the only place anyone could hide their crop. But why look for someone growing weed? Because there's something about this talking bear story that doesn't add up, and I figured anyone growing weed in this town will be more honest regarding it. You think they're hiding something? Of course they are. Especially the halfling families. Haven't you noticed? I just figured they were too polite to gossip about their neighbors. Politeness is just a gentler way of lying. Hairbangs. Don't be fooled. It can be just as malicious as any other lie. Arthux unsheathed his wooden sword and started floating mid-air. Give me 1 minute. I blinked a few times, struggling to understand what I saw. The enchantment on my sword lets me fly, added Arthux, realizing I needed an explanation. I'm going to look over the tree line and see if I spot any weed crops. I stood amazed as he soared higher towards the clear blue sky. His mastery over the weapon's enchantment was evident from the graceful way he carried himself in the air. At that point, I didn't know what else to expect from him. He could grow a second head and I wouldn't question it. Arthux returned 5 minutes later, and just as he suspected, he was able to find a clearing in the forest with a flourishing crop of halfling weed. I'd never really seen that plant before. The leaves were long, dark green, and star-shaped with serrated edges. In the middle, they each had pungent sticky buds carrying a sweet scent that subtly numbed the senses. Arthux plucked one of the buds, then pulled out his own pipe, giving me an expectant look. What? I said. I need fire. I frowned. I'm not lighting your pipe. Come on, it's literally a snap of the fingers for you. You're just trying to get high. I swear it's for the Arthux straightened his back. Something moved over there. I quickly manifested a chain of energy that shot into the bush and restrained whatever hid inside. Gah! Shouted a male voice. After dragging him out, we saw it was a middle-aged halfling with glasses and gardening attire. Please don't hurt me. Are you the one tending this garden? Asked Arthux. The halfling pursed his lips, scared to confess. As an inquisitor, I'm under no obligation to enforce mortal law, said Arthux, especially dumb ones, like the banning of pipeweed. Really? I give you my word, said Arthux. Then yes, this here's Mu's secret garden. The name's Sam Farbook. Nice to meet you both. Likewise, I said, undoing his mana restraints. And you're the town Gardener? Nah, this is a hobby. I actually work at the library. Did you know, miss? Said Arthix, glancing at me for help. Ilvana, I said, defeated. He was never going to remember her name. Sam wilted. Yes. She was a dear friend. Is that so? I said, suspicious. Indeed. You're the first person to say that. Ilvana may have been shy, but she was also an obsessive bookworm. So we saw each other quite often and discussed what we read. And did she ever mention a kid called Darren? Oh yes, plenty of times. Did she hate him too? Not really, said Sam. If anything, she saw potential in him. I tilted my head. That's unexpected. Surprised me too, that it did. Ilvana was the only person who didn't give up on him. She sounds really special, I said, thinking out loud. Very much so. Sam trailed off for a moment with a saddened look. I really admired her tenacity. After seeing her work so hard for the kid, I couldn't help but try to assist. And what did you do? I asked. I told her an old myth about our town, which she intended to use in her class to get Darren interested in our history. Arthix narrowed his eyes. Funny you mention that. I nodded along. Most people here seem to gloss over it. Sam shrugged. I don't blame him, really. It's not exactly safe to say aloud, you know, with the elves running things and all. He quickly looked at me in deference. No offense, ma'am. None taken, I said, confused. So what's the myth? Said Arthix. The tale of Monty Boa, funniest halfling in history. He was a notorious jokester from 1,000 years ago, when North Farthest was still a small village. Sounds like Darren, I said. Exactly. It was meant as a cautionary fairy tale for kids. The way it goes, Monty loved being the center of attention, but when the villagers grew bored of his antics, he got desperate to make them laugh again. One day, after failing to come up with any good jokes, a talking bear approached him in the woods. There we go, said Arthix. This wasn't a mere bear, though. It was actually a fairy changeling that loved Monty's jokes. The creature then said it could aid him by giving him the blessing of Eris, queen of Fae and goddess of chaos. And he accepted? I said. Sam nodded. Monty worked all night writing the greatest joke of his life. Something good enough that anyone could understand. Unfortunately, it wound up being so funny he died of laughter upon finishing it. I widened my eyes. That's it? No, said Arthix. The boy said elvish joke. This one should be understood by everyone. There's still more to it. Sam pursed his lips. I won't get in trouble, right? The inquisitorial order isn't beholden to the Elvish Empire, said Arthix. This might be their territory, but our authority comes from the gods, not politics. Very well, Mr. Human Inquisitor. Years after Monty died, a human kingdom was at war with a precursor to the Elvish Empire. They found themselves at the brink of defeat, only to learn at the last second about Monty's joke. Arthix chuckled. Let me guess, they weaponized it? Sam squinted, surprised. Yes, how did you know? It's what I would do. I don't get it, I said. How did they use it without being affected? Monty's joke book still remained intact on the desk it was written on, said Sam. No one in the village dared to even enter his abandoned house, let alone dispose of it. The humans, however, weren't afraid. They got their hands on it and started translating the joke into Elvish, using one scribe per word so that no individual was exposed to the entire joke. They lost over 50 people during the process. That's ingenious, I said, and horrifying. It said the joke ended the war in less than 3 months. Since elves are so gifted at hearing, human knights would scream it from miles away as they charged, wiping out an entire legion of elves without suffering a single loss. Afterwards, a divine peace treaty was signed with the condition that the original joke and any copies were destroyed forever, never to be told again. Until now, said Arthix. You really think so? I said. It fits too well. Then, what do we do about Darren? Arthix raised an eyebrow. What about him? He's a weapon of mass destruction now. Arthix waved me off. We'll deal with that later. Later? What else needs answering? The most important question, said Arthix. Why did the changeling share the joke with the boy? Does it really matter? I said. It's a fey creature. They literally thrive off chaos. That's too easy, I frowned. And what do you propose? Arthix glanced at his pipe, then looked at Sam. You got a light? Sam smiled with delight. Of course, Mr. Human Inquisitor. Unbelievable, I shouted. Can you please take this seriously? Hairbangs, it's not. I don't want to hear it. This is ridiculous. I'm embarrassed a charlatan like you could even be called an inquisitor. Arthix scowled. Fine, do whatever the fuck you want. I stormed off without another word, heading back to town. That had been the final straw for me. I would rather be excommunicated than deal with his nonsense. It was already the middle of the afternoon, so I figured Darren would be in better shape to speak with me. When I arrived at his house, I was surprised to see Mayor Wisehill sitting on a couch in the living room. Apparently, she was there to apologize for Darren's incarceration and see how he was doing after Arthix made him cry. Speaking of, said Mayor Wisehill, that rude inquisitor isn't with you, is he? No, I replied, still angry. I didn't want him here. Right, said Darren's father. That's probably for the best. He's scary, said Darren, shrinking a little. You don't have to fear Arthix, I said. He's just complicated. To his credit, he's pretty much solved the case. Mayor Wisehill leaned forward, intrigued. He has? Yes, we're almost certain it was a fairy. So Darren's been cleared? Asked his father, eager for the news. Not exactly, I said. Unfortunately, we'll have to take him with us. The father quickly went pale. What? Why? Your son is very dangerous. I'm certain there's a way to fix it, but we need to make sure he can't hurt anyone in the meantime. That's what the mayor said, argued the father. How can I be sure he won't be locked up again? Darren quivered. Not the cage. That won't happen, I said. I'll personally make sure of it. Please, said the father. There has to be a better way. He hung his head. Darren's all I have left. There, dear, said Mayor Wisehill, laying a hand on the father. I realize I had poor judgment last time, and I could have handled it better. But the Inquisitor is being quite reasonable. If you want what's best for your son, let him go and let them sort this out. She smiled at Darren. I think this will ultimately be a good thing. You do? Said Darren. Yes, sweet child. I think you finally learned your lesson. From now on, you'll think twice of ever being like... Arthix swung open the front door. Everyone in the room flinched, alarmed by his loud entrance. His mouth. Arthix had a lit pipe of halfling weed, releasing a big cloud of smoke with his exhale. Finally, he said after taking another puff, I've been looking all over for you. Mayor Wisehill started coughing. What is the meaning of this? Nothing, said Arthix. Just confirmation. Of what? I said, suppressing my rage. You'd know if you stuck around. You see, after some chatting, I learned the only other person who knew the teacher had been researching the joke was none other than the mayor herself. And? I said. My family's been running north farthest for centuries, said Mayor Wisehill, fanning away the smoke. Of course, Ilvana went to me for folklore. If anything, I said, Sam is a bigger suspect. He would be, said Arthix, releasing yet another cloud of smoke. If he didn't grow pipeweed, I scoffed. Why? Because you like it? No, said Arthix. Because fey creatures are allergic to halfling weed. Damn it, screamed Mayor Wisehill as her eyes turned yellow. This can't be happening. Her skin had patches that started to grow blue and scaly. You'll regret this. She then morphed into a hulking, bear-like figure, shattering the house with her size. I couldn't believe it. Arthix was on the right track all along. He had a smug grin on his face after the debris cleared, but he didn't have time to brag. Mayor Wisehill instantly tried to tear him apart with her claws. Arthix, however, was too nimble to ever be struck. The enchantment on his sword allowed him to glide all over the street, dodging every attack with ease. Eventually, he outmaneuvered Mayor Wisehill and sliced off her legs. "I'm a demigod, you fool." Mayor Wisehill grew back her lower half. "You can't kill me." "Darn," said Arthix, floating above her. "You're right." "She is?" I asked. "Yup." "It's annoying." Arthix floated towards a nearby roof and sat on the ledge. "I'm tagging out. Hairbangs, go ahead. You got this." "Eh?" I said, stunned. "What's the matter?" said Arthix. "I thought you were more than capable of protecting yourself." He narrowed his eyes. "Go ahead. Prove it." "You're kidding me." Arthix calmly flipped through his leather-bound book as if enjoying a novel. "Nope, I'm not lifting a finger until necessary." It was at that moment I truly grasped the depths of Arthix's pettiness. Mayor Wisehill bellowed a malevolent laugh before trying to murder me. She didn't mind going after the easier target. I did my best to evade her, but it was too much for me. Her speed and strength were uncanny. I didn't give up, though. My mana chains were far stronger than she expected. I slowly but surely sneaked them around her limbs until tying her up, leaving her unable to move. "I did it," I smiled at Arthix. "I bet you feel silly now." Arthix simply pointed behind me. Mayor Wisehill turned into a snake, slipped through my restraints and shifted. Back into a bear monstrosity. I almost died on the spot. Her claws missed me by the width of a hair. In my desperation, I turned the chains into a dome of mana, hoping I could seal her inside. To my surprise, the spell worked. Mayor Wisehill couldn't break free. She did, however, grow big enough to stretch out the barrier, making it so thin I could hear her say the elvish joke. I didn't realize what she did until it was too late. Covering my ears would mean releasing the dome spell. I fell to the floor, laughing. It didn't take long before I felt dizzy. I was certain this was the end for me. And then I saw Arthix had already acted. The spirit of Sophia, goddess of language, appeared before us and removed the joke out of my head, transferring the words unto Mayor Wisehill. The changeling then succumbed to the laughter, never uttering another word again. Our investigation the next day revealed the reason she killed Ilvana. The teacher had discovered some ancient town documents with the same handwriting of modern ones. She pieced things from there and discovered Wisehill had been murdering her own children for centuries in order to stay as mayor. We found their tomb in her abode, along with a shrine for Monty Boa, where we buried the still laughing changeling for eternity. I had difficulty accepting how incredible Arthix had been. He even made sure to remove the joke from Darren's head during the ordeal. When we were ready to leave, he went up to me and said, "Bad news. I had to call in a bunch of favors to summon Sophia so we can't warp back home." "Great," I said, resigned to my fate. I still don't understand something, though. Why did the mayor do all this? "It's simple," said Arthix, taking a swig from his flask. "Her love for the prankster was genuine." "What makes you think that?" "It explains everything. She hated her god's chaos for killing her favorite mortal and dedicated her life to maintaining order." Arthix chuckled. "Your first hunch was right all along." "Much good it did," I said, dejected. "I should have trusted you." "Don't. Beat yourself up. I got lucky too." "You did?" "The changeling only lost because she assumed I didn't speak Elvish." "Oh, wow. That's right," said Arthix, suddenly cheerful. "Nobody expects a human inquisition. My chief weapon is surprise. Surprise and fear. Wait, my two weapons are—" As he continued to ramble, I noticed that Arthix was already drunk. This would normally distress me, but I then realized he hadn't used his flask at all since arriving in town, which struck me as odd. It made me feel like my initial impression may have been wrong. We walked into that orange sunset with a better understanding of each other. Or so I hoped. Little did I know that what awaited me was a ridiculous months-long journey where this would truly be tested. Now start next story, the insane concept of human justice and its unforeseen consequences. All throughout the galaxy, humanity was famous for its strange notion of justice, not because anyone thought it was admirable, but because they couldn't decipher why anyone would bother enforcing it in the first place, which made humans look mentally unhinged. It all stemmed from something they valued highly. An unfathomable idea called friendship. One could attack a human and gamble on whether or not they would seek revenge. Harming their friends, however, was a surefire way of earning their wrath. Even their pets were given this honor, a fact that baffled all who learned it. Every known culture aside from theirs had achieved spaceflight with a crude sense of fairness and couldn't grasp anything outside of transactional relationships, vengeance, negotiation, appeasement. These concepts were well understood by the galactic community at large. In fact, they were the bedrock of the Federation. Their tenuous alliance between worlds was built on a simple premise: the accumulation of power for its own sake. If one could get the upper hand over others, they were expected to abuse it to its fullest. Then, everyone else would band together in order to oppose them, perpetuating the need for a coalition. This cycle was named the Rhythm of Unity. It served as the basis of all political theory in the galaxy for over 5,000 years, maintaining relative stability when the alternative was tyranny or mass extinction. Every faction accepted it on an instinctive level, even if no one said it aloud, which was why the galaxy fell into chaos when humanity disrupted it. "Who gives a shit?" shouted Sewell. He looked emaciated behind the energy field of his jail cell, with a shaved head and a bruised face. They hadn't fed him properly since his arrest, or even given him medical care, a clear violation of several treaties. His gray eyes, however, were as defiant as always. "I'd rather die than be a snitch." Ambassador Clark furrowed his brow. This idiot hadn't matured a bit since they last met. "I never said you had to confess. Besides, with all the charges you have, you'll be lucky to get anything less than a lifetime sentence." "Oh, yeah. They're not offering a plea deal. The Federation wants you specifically, not any of your cohorts." Sewell squinted for a moment, confused. "Then why the hell are you lecturing me about this Rhythm of Unity crap?" "Because you need to understand the delicate position we're in. Humanity's mere presence has shifted the balance of power in ways we didn't intend. What we call friendship, they call opportunistic maneuvering. The more we endear ourselves to our allies, the more they expect us to betray them, which just frustrates everyone when we don't. It's almost like they want us to be power-hungry maniacs. And, Ambassador," Clark frowned, "and you getting caught played right into our enemy's hand." "You're being dramatic. We're at the brink of war. How's that my fault? You said it yourself. These aliens are incapable of friendship. It was bound to happen at some point. Just because something isn't your fault doesn't mean it isn't your responsibility." Ambassador Clark rubbed his temples, massaging away his growing migraine. "Your father is rolling in his grave right now. Here we go again. You could have been an admiral for Earth's Navy. Shit. You could have even stayed an elite bounty hunter for the Federation, but no, you just had to be king of the fucking pirates. Do you have any idea how bad that makes us look?" Sewell chuckled. Ambassador Clark narrowed his stare. "What's so funny?" "I'm just flattered by all the attention." "Don't let it get to your head. This isn't just about you. It's about humanity at large." Sewell raised an eyebrow. "Is it? I mean, sure, I raided my fair share of shipments, but I never targeted civilians. I only stole from shady business folk. The only innocent people I hurt are the 1 or 2 dozen planetary governors I seduced, and I fail to see how that could doom our species. That's the problem. You're not the only troublemaker. Right now, the 3 most notorious criminals in all the galaxy are human, and the Senate wants to make an example out of all of you." Sewell straightened his posture, intrigued. "Really?" "Yes, the timing is awesome." Ambassador Clark paused, taken aback. No, it's horrible. This puts into question every alliance we've built, almost like we've been deceiving everyone into trusting us. Now, even our closest trade partners are starting to doubt us. Whatever. Who are the other two? Do I know them? Probably not. The first one was a rogue mech pilot known as the Junkyard Angel. He was a genius in his field, the first human to make it into the Federation's mech suit battle school. Unfortunately, he dropped out to become a vigilante of sorts. Sounds like a badass. It's not as noble as it sounds. He literally stole a warp core and threatened to blow it up during his escape, holding an entire planet hostage. Literal act of terrorism from what was supposed to be our most gifted pilot. That just makes him cooler, in my opinion. Ambassador Clark swallowed down his irritation. Scolding him wouldn't fix his attitude. It didn't work when Sewell was a teenager, and it wouldn't work now. Furthermore, many people back on Earth held the same opinion. Clark himself didn't even know what to believe right now. He simply ignored Sewell's irreverence and said, none of this would be a problem if it weren't for the third criminal. He's the one who threw a wrench into everything, a professional wrestler known as Tyson Alpha. No way, said Sewell. Perking up? You've heard of him? Of course. That's humanity's champ. How'd a goody two-shoes like him get in trouble? He suplexed a bully diplomat during a press conference. Crazy. Did he just snap or something? Apparently, while promoting a long-awaited rematch, the diplomat kicked Tyson's dog due to a misunderstanding. It took over 20 guards to stop his rampage. This was being broadcast in front of trillions, and most cultures don't understand our respect for pets, so now half the galaxy thinks we're unstable lunatics. Sol nodded along, impressed. What a hero. Will you please take this seriously? It's a diplomatic nightmare. Those bullies control a significant portion of the Federation military, and they've been waiting for any excuse to crush us. They even tried to kill me once. I don't blame them. They hurt a poor dog, and all you care about is keeping the peace. You have it coming, really. I'm trying my best, jackass, Sewell smirked at the outburst. Ambassador Clark let out a heavy sigh. Being sleep-deprived these past 3 weeks was starting to weigh on him. He had settled trade disputes, brokered peace between warring planets, and even shrugged off assassination attempts, all without losing his patience. Sewell, however, was the one person who could actually get under his skin. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to snap. Are you? Sewell grew somber, lowering his voice. I get it. You think I'm a fuck-up. All my dreams were a lie. His eyes grew vacant, as if remembering the people who died in front of him. I should have just known my place and never even tried. Sewell, please. No, I won't hear it. Showing up to say I told you so isn't helping. It's more like pouring salt in the wound. After getting my crew blown up, having my allies betray me, and then facing prison for the rest of my life. The last thing I need is some rule-following nerd telling me why I'm such a loser. Ambassador Clark stayed quiet. He had never seen Sewell brought so low. Their relationship had never been the best, but this level of vitriol was new from him. His dreams of freedom really had been shattered. Watching a cheerful person grow this bitter didn't feel right. It was almost like the universe itself had lost a small part of what made it bearable. A stubborn and cocky part, sure, but valuable. Nonetheless, Ambassador Clark waited for Sol to calm down, gently saying, It took a lot of favors to arrange this meeting. Do you seriously think I showed up just to rub it in your face? Sure feels like it. You know that's not true. Then, what are you hoping to accomplish? It's not like you're trying to break me out or anything. Ambassador Clark stiffened up. Wait. Sewell leaned forward. Are you... Ambassador Clark panicked for a second. Don't get it twisted, You're kidding me. Shh. Ambassador Clark activated his earpiece. Sarah, did you finish your scan of the room? Yes, sir. There's a listening device inside his cell, but I've already disabled it. I also put the camera feed on a loop, so you should have some privacy now. Good job. Clark threw away his persona of ambassador, lighting a cigarette with a candid gesture. Look, kid, I have to be frank with you. We've had our differences, but I'm not happy about this either. Many people back home actually think the same as you. They're hungry for war, and it's starting to get out of control. Over a dog? It's the principle of the matter. They see Tyson's arrest as bowing to the aliens again. I'm surprised you approve then. I don't. Clark took a big drag of his cigarette. He really needed the nicotine. We're currently in a double bind, and I refuse to go out like a chump. What do you mean? The Federation wants us to declare war. That's why they ignored treaties and abused gray areas to catch you. They're testing our limits. If we ignore it and back off, they'll just keep pushing us around. And if we declare war because of a pet, we'll look as insane as they think we are. But there has to be a third way. If it doesn't exist, then I'll make it myself. You're out of your mind, Clark. Really? You, of all people, are giving up. I've finally learned my lesson. There is no justice in this galaxy. Saul hung his head, growing sullen. In the end, anything goes. It doesn't have to be that way, shouted Clark. Saul flinched back with a puzzled look. Aren't you tired of this? Begged Clark, his voice breaking from desperation. I've been flying from planet to planet non-stop trying to prevent this madness, but I keep finding the same apathy everywhere I go. Billions are going to die, Saul. Billions. And nobody on either side seems to care. Saul didn't have a response. He had never seen his former guardian show this much emotion. Clark leaned against a wall, barely enjoying his cigarette. All of his fatigue bubbled up to the surface. He was tired, so damn tired. The only thing he wanted to do was fall asleep and never wake up. Neither had the strength to talk anymore. The two of them shared a minute of silence that felt louder than any words. This was the most they had bonded in a long time. In a way, it was nice to be on the same wavelength for once, sharing an awkward glance that made them both chuckle. Clark then snuffed out what remained of his cigarette and said, When your parents died, I didn't know what to do with you. Your father was my best friend, and I couldn't leave his son to fend for himself. But I wasn't ready to raise a kid. And well, you know the rest. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm sorry. I get it, said Sewell. I didn't make it easy either. For what it's worth, thank you, Clark smiled. You don't have to thank me. The universe is already a cold, lonely place as it is. Shouldn't we try our best to make it bearable? Yeah, I guess. Then help me stop this war. How? It's not like I can do anything about it. That's not true. The key problem right now is the imprisonment of Tyson Alpha. You're heading to the same prison as him tomorrow, so if you manage to break him out… Saul widened his eyes. Our side wouldn't have a reason for war. Clark nodded. Exactly. And we would have plausible deniability, all without losing face. This is completely off the books, though. Not even my superiors will know about it, but me and my team will back you up as much as we can. You have a month until we go to war. Afterwards, it'll be too late. This is nuts. Is escape even possible? Clark pursed his lips, afraid to say, It's never been done before. Saul hung his head. But, continued Clark, if anyone can do it, it's you. That's not very reassuring. Look, you're at rock bottom. I get it. But you and your crew were fighting for something. Freedom, justice, call it whatever you want. The fact is, this galaxy is a miserable and downright cruel place. Now you finally have a chance to change it. Are you really going to let your friends die in vain? Saul clenched his fist. Never. Good. Then what do you say? Are you in?